So, hello everyone, I'm Raji, and welcome to this podcast on research in areas of conflict. I have with me today Ms. Joelle Hassanieh and Ms. Marwa Abed, who will give us more insight on this broad topic. We will also listen to the personal experience of one of the most prominent experts in this field of work. In general, we know that the information from research areas of conflict is scarce, and this is due to several factors, including limited infrastructure, lack of human resources, both in terms of number and capacity, and insecurity. And of course, we will elaborate each and every point of these later on in this video. But first, let's start by asking a simple question. Why do research in areas of conflict?
Let me first begin to say that research is highly essential to report on the health and humanitarian consequences in areas of conflict. Research is, by example, reported in terms of retrospective mortality studies, which are the most common in these types of areas. The death rates in age groups under the 5 years of age or above the 5 years of age are an important parameter to judge the necessity of initiating a humanitarian emergency action. Information on the nature of the trauma, the surgical wounds, the malnutrition, and the surveillance of epidemiological data allow proper needs assessment, the need for specific nutritional interventions or specific actions. Moreover, mental health surveys are increasingly applied in areas of conflict to assess the consequences of the violence. Research is also needed to investigate the feasibility and the effectiveness of some interventions, specifically the psychosocial interventions.
Thank you for this detailed answer. The next logical question would be, what are the core elements to do research in these areas of conflict, and what are the challenges faced in such conditions?
So to begin with, we will discuss 6 core elements of research in conflict settings. First, the type of evidence, whether qualitative or quantitative, should be tempered by the circumstances being described. For example, human rights violations are better described through a qualitative approach. Second, scientific validity of research in conflict areas is in question. This is due to insecurity that limits the researchers' movement if they wish to collect new data, the unpredictability of the setting, and the displacement of the population, which prevent the researchers from conducting prospective studies. And also the cultural differences that may prevent researchers from comprehending and capturing true conclusions from such populations. Third, study implementation should be preceded by feasibility analysis and resource commitment to see it through to completion. Also, involving and training a core group of national collaborating researchers would facilitate the continuity of this research. The fourth issue, which research in war-torn areas, is the sensitivity of the results, as well as their representability. Certain countries have forced researchers to omit findings, including sensitive data that may ruin campaigns of disinformation or that may weaken government hopes. Finally, political control has imposed increasing constraints on researchers in conflict zones, affecting both the quality and the quantity of research. Now, moving to the challenges that researchers face when doing research in conflict zones, they need to prepare themselves with pre-field research about the area where the team is going to work, including familiarizing oneself through the local news outlet, getting on the record and off the record opinions from the government officials, and comparing past experiences of people with a similar background. Also, researchers will need to agree to an acceptable level of risk they and their team are willing to take. There should be predetermined circumstances under which the team would no longer be allowed to continue their work and need to prioritize their safety above the data. Besides, they should also take precautions for emergencies and potential escalations in the area in which they are conducting research at. These could include acquiring emergency contacts and having a reserve of cash to use in the event of its necessity.
Thank you so much, Marwa. Now we move on to the most important question in this podcast. What are the ethical challenges when doing research in areas of protracted conflict?
Unfortunately, the ethical challenges in areas of conflict are quite vast. They are very vast. The general considerations outlining this topic are the informed consent, the research design, the ethical review, the benefit to the participants. Let me start by the process of informed consent is quite sensitive. It has to be sensitive to the norms, to the customs, to the sensitivities of the local area. In conflicted settings, basically, there are areas of high illiteracy and mistrust to authority. So basically, the process of informed consent may seem meaningless or even dangerous. In a humanitarian crisis, researchers are also the providers of care as well. So basically, extra care should be taken to ensure that the participant enrollment or refusal to enrollment is not interpreted in any means as in being linked to the provider of assistance. The patients must take a decision. It has to be a well-informed decision and uncoerced decision. With respect to the research design, reiterating on the Declaration of Helsinki that says the benefits, the risks, the burdens, and the effectiveness of a new research method should be tested against those current methods with the best prophylactic, diagnostic, and therapeutic methods. On the other hand, the confidentiality of the data, the anonymity of the patient identifiers are most important ethical considerations, and they should not be compromised. When it comes to the benefit to the participants, the researchers have to take extra care, and they have to guarantee that the population being tested has to have the most benefit out of the conducted study. Moving on to the ethical review, we know that in areas of conflict or in conflicted zones, we have no ethical boards. So basically, we can rely on ethical board from outside. Specific considerations we still need to consider in areas of conflict is the high vulnerability of the population. These people, the population residing in areas of conflict, they have heavy vulnerability ranges because they have high stress levels due to physical stress and mental stress due to trauma. Therefore, interviewing these patients must be taken in very specific circumstances and by trained investigators. Because asking someone to reiterate about their personal experience causes exceeding levels of trauma associated with the event itself. Additionally, the investigator should do the interview with a very clear methodology, and there has to be a possibility for referral for psychosocial support specifically.
Well, thank you so much for all the theoretical overall for this podcast. So let's take now some personal experience from one of the most prominent figures in the research area conflict, Professor Ghassan Abou Sitta, who's nicknamed the man who fixes broken faces. Dr. Abou Sitta is a multi-award winning plastic surgeon with a reputation as one of the world's leading specialists in craniofacial surgery, facial aesthetic, cleft lip, cleft palate, and trauma-related injuries. His unique backgrounds combine the skills and expertise of field leading plastic surgeons with the rigors of academia and the compassion of humanitarianism. Hello, Dr. Abou Sitta, and thank you so much for being with us today. So, you say in one of your articles entitled Ecology of War, the intensity and the prolonged nature of the wars in the region are not temporal, like battles. They do not start and finish, but are prolonged to the extent that they end up creating an ecology of war. This ecology maintains itself well beyond shooting and killing, and it changes the living environment of people. The wounds are physical, psychological, and social, and the environment is altered to become hostile, both to the able-bodied and more hostile to the wounded. Thus, two questions arise. How does the ecology of war affect research in war-trodden countries and areas of protracted conflict? And in what ways, if at all, does this ecology of war affect the nature of research and its ethical constraint? Can you please answer those questions for us based on your personal experience?
Protracted conflict affects research in two ways. One of the consequences of the ecology of war is data poverty. And by data poverty, what I mean is the presence of empirical data which those who live in these conditions can use to participate in global debates, many of which actually discuss their own lives, their own conditions. And therefore others take on bring their assumptions to the table, because those who live in these conditions are unable to provide that kind of empirical data. And data poverty then becomes yet another one of the traps that further disempowers people living within these ecologies.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abou, for your time and your contribution to this podcast. And thank you, Marwa,
Thank
and
you.
Joelle, for your contribution also. Thank you so much. That's it for our podcast. Thank you.